The Spin-Off Podcast Network.
Are you making the most of your KiwiSaver investment? Generate is an award-winning KiwiSaver provider with a track record of strong long-term performance. Making a smart decision now could add tens of thousands of dollars by the time you reach retirement. Book a no-obligation chat with a Generate KiwiSaver advisor today at generatekiwisaver.co.nz/get-advice. A copy of the product disclosure statement is available at generatekiwisaver.co.nz. The issuer of the scheme is Generate Investment Management Limited, and of course, past performance does not guarantee future returns.
I'm Toby Manhire, and this is Juggernaut, the story of the Fourth Labour Government, a podcast in 6 parts.
Doesn't give my opponents much time to run up to an election, does it?
This nation is at risk.
What do you think you're up to now, you perverted little liar?
I could smell the uranium on it as you lean towards it.
There's a radical overhaul in the history of New Zealand's administration.
Juggernaut, the story of the Fourth Labour Government, made with the support of New Zealand On Air. Listen now on The Spin-Off or wherever you get your podcasts. Tēnā koutou katoa, this is Toby Manhire. It's 10:30 on February the 21st. We got together for our regular podcast this morning, Ben, Annabelle and Te here, and we got about, 20 minutes of the way in, and Mad Chapman alerted us to the awful news that Efeso Collins, Green MP, former Auckland councillor, had died after collapsing in a charity run this morning in Auckland. So we stopped what we were talking about, and then we thought, well, look, we'll just keep it real. So what you're about to hear is the podcast as intended, and then we stop, and that's when we're alerted to the news, and then we spend a little time talking about whanana Efeso Collins. So it's a bit clunky, but you'll forgive us. And as we process the really upsetting news, and you'll hear what follows. Kia ora koutou. On the agenda today, Grant Robertson leaves Parliament and goes back to university. Christopher Luxon takes the pulse of the nation, and National demands tougher sanctions for job seekers. Former Labour and National leaders warn that New Zealand is compromising its independent foreign policy. But first, a big thank you from me and you, Annabelle, and also from you, Ben, and from you, Te to all people who showed up at Q Theatre last week. For a live show as part of Podfest, thanks to Q Theatre. It was a lot of fun. Thanks to Jack Tame and Maeve Forbes, who we dragged unceremoniously to the stage to join us as special guest stars.
The lost episode.
Well,
secret
yes.
episode. The super premium.
We're being told that there was a problem with the audio feed. That's why we won't be able to share it with the wider Gone by Lunchtime audience. I suspect the lawyers have been involved. Lawyers or the deep state. Or foreign powers, because there was quite a lot of ageism. There's body shaming. There was a lot of slander from you generally, Annabelle.
Yeah, it was quite defamatory.
So probably just as well that it's not going to make it to air. It's like the great sealed section of Gone by Lunchtime podcast.
We'll recreate it.
The lost tapes.
And put it on the Patreon. We'll do a table read.
It will remain tapu just between us and the 300 people who came.
That's right. Maybe the bootleg tapes will emerge on Trade Me at some point. That would be exciting. We will have other live show stuff coming up this year, I think. High-level talks are underway. So we
just need RMA changes so that Eden Park can be
That's right.
can be
That's right.
enlarged enough to fit the live Gone by
Would that be the one that we would invite
the pyro show?
Helen Clark to be a special guest on episodely. 6:60, Helen Clark joining us on Gone by Lunchtime. All right, let's start by talking about the State of the Nation, Bizzo. The task for Christopher Luxon on Sunday was to change the record, really, because the outriggers of the coalition had been dominating the conversation, and it was a chance to, reassert, I suppose, himself.
Can we
was
make it more New
What?
Zealandy sounding though, and stop calling it the state of the nation and call it just the state of it? The state of it.
Yeah.
The state of it speech.
Christopher Luxon addresses New Zealand about the state of it, the bloody state of it.
This is the bloody state of it.
Yeah.
That's a good idea.
Thank
The
you.
Greens do state of the planet, don't they? Of course. What about the state of the digs? Or the state of the
mojo.
State of the mojo. Mojo was mentioned in the speech.
Mojo reading. the annual mojo checkup.
Well, that should be a staple, in my view, at every post-cabinet press conference on a Monday. Christopher Luxon should come out and sort of measure the mojo in the room just to see how he's progressing. Because already we're having a 100-day plan. Where is the mojo going to sit at the end of 100 days? Where is it going to sit at the end of 1 year? And what are we aiming for at the end of the term? Because you can't recreate the mojo in one term.
Surely it has to be
It's a two-term project.
Increased mojo.
Exactly.
What?
It's got to be tracking
The
in the
mojo
right.
trajectory.
Yeah.
The mojo trajectory.
Yeah. The
What-
trajectory.
What gets
Nice.
measured is what matters.
What gets measured gets mojoed.
We need some mojo stats. Who is the Ministry of Stats? Minister of Stats.
It's a good question.
Bailey?
That's quite a tricky question. Who's the Minister of Statistics?
Let me Google it.
Annabelle, people can't see you. Say, let me have a think. So he diagnosed the state of the nation, did Christopher Luxon on Sunday, as fragile. And then he sort of did a lot of tough times ahead. It was a kind of expectation-setting speech in a way. It wasn't designed necessarily to be his big Martin Luther King moment. That's still to come when the mojo's back. It was more felt quite a bit like a campaign speech in a way. A lot of descriptions of the state that the country had been left in.
Many such cases.
Many such cases.
Of speeches that sound like stump speeches in a campaign.
I kind of thought in a way, though, when the poll came out on Monday night and it showed results that were almost exactly the election result, is kind of those of us who are going, come on, move it along, man. It's like, well, probably he's right. People have not been paying attention in the way that we might imagine they were, or that those of us who are saddos who talk about politics all the time think they are. You know, it's kind of, maybe that's where it is. Maybe that's kind of, all right, let's go. We've inherited his argument. We've inherited a mess. And he used the word fixing a lot, Ben Thomas. He said back on track twice. He didn't use.
Did he say turnaround job?
I think he might have said turnaround job. That's what he said, what we would have called back in the, he's used turnaround job before. What he didn't use, at least in my, Control F examination of the speech, he didn't use the word outcomes. So, I mean, that's crazy. He didn't use the word deliverables, which again, he did say New Zealand's the best country on planet Earth, which is one of the jazz classics.
Measurable.
He did say delivery quite a bit.
He did say
didn't
delivery. Yeah, he didn't say
there was a lot of
deliverables.
delivering.
I think he was trying. I think someone was kind of trying to make this sound like a human being speaking. Which is, what did you make of it, Annabelle? I'm sure you were glued to it all day, or perhaps you consumed it through 6 o'clock news. I don't know. What was your impression? Did you feel as though the scene had been set?
Well, I whipped through it at like 6:30 this morning, where you do that thing where you press the 30-second skip. So I did that. My impression was that, it was the sort of speech that appeals to the party faithful, and there's lots of whooping and hee-hawing in the background, so they were liking what they were hearing. I appreciated that he kicked off, like once he'd done the shout-outs to all his homies, that he started the speech by discussing education and its importance to him. I don't think you would describe it as a soul-stirring, particularly inspiring speech. It was good to hear him discuss the things that he would like to achieve, as opposed to just what they're getting rid of. So there was a little bit of that. I felt like it was the most confident and self-assured I'd seen him. Dropped a couple of well-written jokes. I think the issue that National has is that being a new Prime Minister, it's a bit like being on a date. Like if you talk too much shit about your ex, i.e. the last government, after a while it starts to become a bit of a put-off. So I think, it was a reasonably good balancing act in that regard, but soon they're going to have to move on from the criticism of the last regime and speak more to what they're achieving as they go.
Yeah, tricky one, that meme, the old 9 long years, or in this case 6 long years, and I again did a little bit of
in some portfolios 3 long years.
Well, that's right, isn't it? There is that problem where which you raised at the live blog, I think, Ben, that was it on stage when it was Judith Collins and Winston Peters discussing a matter of great importance, and she made a reference to what they'd inherited and then quickly had to revise because, of course, the first of those 3 years were tickety-boo in certain areas, but the last 3 years, but it is that is. I did some statistical analysis on that as well, and when the word government was used 10 times, mostly in the first part of the speech, the government described was the previous one, but at 13, so a majority, was reference to my government, the government ahead. And Annabelle's right, isn't she, Ben, that you need to sort of shift the dial towards here's what we're doing.
So exciting times. That I think was the Taxpayer Union poll that came out at the beginning of the month. It showed that we were back on track. We were back in net positive territory, and it was a slightly different measure. It was a new question that they were asking about whether you approve of the government's performance.
No, but the Talbot Mills poll, their client polling also showed that
also had us back on track.
Back on track. Back in the right track has climbed above the wrong track.
The net positive.
I mean, mojo.
But at the same time, inflation has been down, but the thing which is really bearing down on the economy, which is the high interest rates, in order to get inflation under control from the Reserve Bank. We've seen various bank economists say, actually, we think rather than easing, it will be cranking up. The Reserve Bank's worried about core inflation.
ANZ's Sharon Zollner suggested that interest rates could go up further.
And unemployment's creeping up a little bit. But people are still finding it a little bit tough. And so what you want to do is remember to remind people that this is all a hangover from the last 3 to 6 years of neglect in different portfolio areas. And also you want to establish before you try and do anything that it's kind of like a BMX trick. Before you do a sort of Napoleon Dynamite little, jump off a sort of 6-inch ramp on the road, you want to impress upon the watchers just how difficult and courageous a feat that you are attempting. And governments
two flat tires, chain off, nevertheless.
Yeah, and same sort of thing when it comes to the accounts. The other thing is that they've really been trying to hammer home the sort of fiscal irresponsibility, and I think they debuted a new figure, which was the Kāinga Ora figure, and saying that Kāinga Ora is going to flog off
sell off a bunch of houses,
state houses, in order to try and rein its costs. And
Whakatahi's budget was at $200 billion. $200 billion! That's half GDP. That's one of those kind of, they've just sort of added up everything that's been floated generally, right?
They've added up things that are on actual sort of plans, no matter how sort of nascent. But
some of those kind of monorails underground, the Auckland Harbour kind of
If you genuinely believed that the $200 billion bill had been racked up, you would have to genuinely believe that the second harbour crossing was imminent and that was something that was going to go ahead. But then again, Junaid Tibshrani from the Herald had a story today saying that, even leaving that aside, in terms of committed spending and forthcoming projects, Whakatahi is about 2 times extended in terms of the forthcoming costs. And that's not just a function of the previous government and its profligacy, although it's certainly part of it, but it's also the fact that, National have added on, big expensive projects of their own in terms of their own promises. And part of that is because of these big infrastructure spends, there's always a tendency to sort of say, well, we'll pay for it down the line, we'll come up with some innovative financing, whatever. But ultimately somebody's going to have to pay for all of this stuff, the infrastructure stuff, the tax cuts, and part of what Luxon was doing was preparing the ground and saying, it's not just going to be a sort of free lunch where everything's sort of, distributed at random like a lolly scramble or whatever. There's actually going to be a bit of what do you call tough love.
I think that's a fine line that he's going to have to navigate too, because on one hand, in the minds of the average voter, he's talking a lot about, how fiscally irresponsible the last government was, and that we have these huge, $200 billion holes. But then at the same time, cancelling things like the Auckland fuel tax, talking about what deep trouble our health system is and kāinga order and all of that, but then giving a massive tax cuts, potentially retrospectively, to landlords. So how it's going to become difficult for voters to rationalise those two different ideas in their minds.
Yeah, and the transport predicament that you touched on as well is coming quickly down the slipway when Simeon Brown will need to announce what the transport plan is and whether or not the various promises that were included in the National Party manifesto can be achieved. Given the limitations that were laid out in that piece you mentioned, Ben. The speech on Sunday was also setting the tone, providing the backing track to the announcement that followed the next day on beneficiaries from Louise Upston, the Minister for Social Development. And it was interesting because what it really amounted to was a letter to MSD saying you must use the sanctions that are available to you. There was a period across COVID, I think it was, when Kamal Sepuloni, previously in the role, said only use them when necessary. I think that was the
I think it was prior to COVID.
Was it prior to COVID?
It was part of the kindness manifesto.
Okay, good.
Was easing up. And originally there wasn't even an instruction. There was just Kamal Sepuloni said at a press conference with Jacinda Ardern, we expect that case managers will take a kinder approach.
Right, okay.
To
so,
like a Mojo directive.
So this Ben, we are expecting to come in the months, years ahead, a traffic light system that was promised for sanctions. Love some traffic lights, and also some targets that Upston is promising to come up with. But so is this more than just a waving of hands? Is this, obviously, presumably, there is a ripple of satisfaction when the headlines come out, crack down on beneficiaries. That's part of resetting the tone. That's part of the ambition. Is it more than that?
I mean, it will have effects on the ground. It will have impacts on beneficiaries. It will have impacts probably on the total number of beneficiaries. You can, in terms of, there are sort of the structural regulatory things you can do. You can change benefit levels, raise them. They've gone up pretty significantly over the last 6 years.
Of course, National has decoupled the benefits from wages and repeat them increase, to inflation. Yeah.
Yeah. Or they are going to do that.
Yeah.
But look, on the ground, in terms of the experience that somebody either applying for or on a benefit, this will have, this could potentially have significant impacts, especially if they have missed their targets in terms of, applying for jobs, turning up to workshops, things like that. Now, whether that's a good thing or a bad thing will depend, first of all, on the circumstances of individual people and also how you see the system as a whole. But in terms of everyday experience, yes, just writing to case managers to sort of redirect their approach to, essentially, under the previous national government, there was simply a target to try and move people off move long-term beneficiaries off the benefit. And when you give public servants a target, they will try and meet that with whatever levers that they can. And so I think the general consensus is that the apparatus of the welfare state became much more hostile to people either getting on or staying on benefits. The forms were something like 60 pages long to complete. A lot of people couldn't do it without sort of assistance, particularly, if you're the sort of person who will end up on a long-term benefit. You are probably not in the sort of higher education echelons, things like that. And also you can exert a great deal of influence over the quality of life of somebody who's on a benefit as their case manager, right? I mean, I was on benefit when my girlfriend and I were both on benefits when we left university, right? Because we didn't have jobs, right? And she went on the so-called artist's dole, which was, sort of sold as this way of creating, creative pathways to employment. I think it was called Pathways to Artistic and Creative Employment.
Some impressive people came. What art was your girlfriend at the time practicing?
She's a dancer.
Dancer.
Oh my God.
Sorry, this is important. What form of dance?
Ballet. And
Amazing.
I went on the benefit.
Were you dancing?
I wasn't dancing.
What was your what art form were you practicing?
Well, the
side.
My case manager said to me, what are you, what sort of jobs are you looking for? And I was like, well, I've just finished with a law degree, so I'm getting my entry to the bar or whatever. And she looked at me and said, oh, well, you won't be with us for long. I never heard from Wins again. I was on the benefit for like 7 months. Meanwhile, my poor girlfriend at the time, she, like other artistic people, had been like lured out into the open as somebody who never intended to get a real job. And she was summoned to things, I think twice a week she had to come in and they'd send her on things saying, have you ever thought making coffee can be artistic? And then, teach her how to use an espresso machine and things like that. And, I had a great time on the dole. She had a terrible time on the dole, right? And so, the experience in terms of and it goes both ways. First of all, with people who have had problems with getting into employment.
Something must have happened. Is she coming in?
Yeah.
Okay, sorry to interrupt there. We were just got news in the middle of the podcast recording, really awful news. Shocking and upsetting news that Efeso Collins, a Green List MP, has died this morning in downtown Auckland. So we're going to stop the pod there. We can come back to discuss Grant Robertson and AUKUS and all that. And just so we're just briefly. I mean, a few thoughts on Efeso Collins. Ben, you knew Efeso, who leaves a wife and 2 young daughters, and who was a really important councillor in Auckland, and went on to contest the mayoralty unsuccessfully, and then went into Parliament as a Green MP, where he's been just for a short time. You first encountered him on campus at Auckland University, yeah?
When I was a first year, one of the first people that I ever remember seeing at university was Efeso Collins, and I think he was handling enrollments or something and working on that, and he was just this sort of larger-than-life figure, sort of exuded charisma. He was he set up the Auckland University Pacific Island Students Association a year or two after that, sort of just single-handedly led that. He was just an incredible presence, marked out as a future leader, even you could just see it, and I hadn't seen him for many years until he started as a councillor, he started doing sort of punditry on those shows like Q&A and The Nation, and just such an incredibly warm and decent person. And obviously we were on the other side, opposite sides during the mayoral campaign, and just such an incredibly, friendly, just a fantastic person. And This is extremely sad. Annabelle?
I only met Efeso a handful of times, usually in green rooms and places like that, through his commentary, but he's someone that I had long admired. Really, I think an embodiment of Polynesian excellence. Someone who represented his communities with such mana and passion and dignity and charisma. And I just feel so aroha, obviously, for his ainga, his family, his communities, and for all the people whose hopes and aspirations he carried and represented so beautifully. Mm.
Thank you, Kia ora. I was lucky enough to interview Efeso at his home in Otahuhu in early January when he announced that he was running for the mayoralty, and at the time he was still kind of recoiling a bit from some death threats that he'd faced, he and his family, and had discussions with his wife Fia about whether or not to continue in politics, and they discussed it at length, and they talked to their daughters too, I think. His wall covered in photos of his little girls, and decided to pursue things. And he came second in the mayoral election, but he was just sort of beginning the next chapter, I think, and keeping a relatively low profile. But this is an incredible political career, potentially cut short. We don't know what he got to next, and I guess just to send aroha to his colleagues, especially his family. He was a really important figure in New Zealand society and politics, and we'll miss him. Mm. Here's his campaign song from the 2022 mayoral campaign by Church Boys. This one's for you, Fess.
Together, that's unity. Say less, no stress, no drama. Vote for the big guy, Fess Obama.
Kia ora, I'm Duncan Grieve, founder of The Spinoff. You can help us keep all of The Spinoff's award-winning journalism free for everybody by becoming a member today at thespinoff.co.nz/donate.
Talofa lava. I'm Madeline Chapman, editor at The Spinoff. If you have the means, consider supporting our high-quality journalism by becoming a Spinoff member. Sign up now at thespinoff.co.nz/donate.
The Spinoff Podcast Network.